Hi, my research topic is the everyday practice of foreign domestic helper in a study school. In this paper, I would explore the foreign domestic helpers' manipulation in exploiting a space for their own in the study school at Central and in Hong Kong. And I will mainly refer to Michel Certeau's book, The Practice of Everyday Life, to figure out the phenomenon that the weak overcome the strong in city. Hong Kong is the typical capitalism city. Anything in this city almost cannot get rid of the domination of capitalism. From urban design to kids' education, economic benefits set the major tone of the city. The capitalism culture in the city has become a hegemony. However, the hegemony of capitalism culture also has its own limitation. It is so huge in the city that there is often somewhere that it cannot defend. There are also gaps and flaws in it where people can take the advantages to creep in. And as a non-local, this is very interesting to me to see how people challenge this strong value. And it is interesting to me that someone would struggle hard against the hegemony of capitalism in this city, just as Don Quixote fight with White Mouse and David defeats the giant Goliath. There's nobody in the city using various approaches of making do, transform the city in their own way, resisting the existing meaning and functions of the comedy. This nobody includes those who unlawful selling goods in the stores on street, the street sleepers in Tsim Sha Tsui, and the foreign domestic helpers who gathered in the Central Square in Central every public holiday. The foreign domestic helpers not only change the dual color of Central in holiday, but also exploit their own culture space, introduce the Philippine culture that Hong Kong people originally considered as the fall behind into Central and turn Central the place into a space that run over Philippine culture. The practice of foreign domestic helpers not only demonstrates how nobody could possibly exploit their own space in consuming in where mainstream culture dominates, but also let us see and know how individuals may get rid of the hegemony of dominant culture. So, in my research, I will refer to Michel Certeau's view in his book, The Practice of Everyday Life, to discuss how the nobody may manipulate the dominant culture through studying the case of how foreign domestic helpers exploit their space in the Central Square at Central. In the practice of everyday life, Michel Certeau examines the ways in which people individualize mass culture, altering things from utilitarian objects to strict plans to rituals, laws, and language in order to make them their own. He sees individuals as guerrilla in the city and emphasizes the possibilities that the weak could overcome the strong and serenity could subdue the activity. John Fiske also states in his book, Understanding Popular Culture, that the strong is happy, lack of imagination, and often organized, while the weak is creative, ingenious, and flexible. In this sense, the weak could utilize tactics to cope with the strong strategies and poach in existing framework. So when it comes to the structure of the research paper's body part, I will first briefly review the history of how the Central Square became dominated by foreign domestic helpers on holidays and discuss what is the central as a place, and then discuss how central's value dominates over the whole city. And I will unfold the discussion on the foreign domestic helper as the guerrilla in everyday life. And lastly, I will further discuss how tactics cope with tragedy and help the weak overcome the strong and construct a space in a place. For the first part, history that changed the weather of Central Square. I do amount of research and found that it is in the 80s, in order to build up business, Hong Kong Land, the property, um, proposed to set a reserved zone for pedestrians on holidays. But what they did not expect is that ever since then, the foreign domestic helpers occupy and gather on the street and roads among buildings, making there a space for gathering with friends. This will be just a very short and brief paragraph giving some sense of how and when the change happened. For the second part, what is central as a place? Here I will refer to Michel Certeau's definition of place. According to his definition in the practice of everyday life, he explained that a place is the order in accord with which elements are distributed in relationships of coexistence. A place is thus an instantaneous configuration of positions. It implies an indication of stability. When outsiders look at an unfamiliar building from afar, such as through a photograph of its exterior, they see a simply stable, concretely distinguishable place. I feel like his description in this part is very close to how people perceive Hong Kong as an outsider. So, and then I will look to the skyline of Central and will refer to the tourist guideline and city publication to see how these materials and how these parties present Central as a place where skyscraper reach to the sky and is ruled by and how the city is ruled by rational governance. It is then high above the masses and cold, and then it gives people a feeling that it is a place demonstrate the dominant value of the city where normal citizens can only follow the rules. So this is the part that gives some sense of how I will place Central as a place in this paper. And then the third part, I will talk about Central's domination over the city. In this part, I will discuss how the value dominates the majority of the city and how it shapes the ideology of the city, like economic, reach, efficiency, development, globalization, etc. The logic has become a hegemony in the city, and people tend not to question or to ask for its rationality. So, because of the centrist value is so dominates, and then many places are disappeared, just like the old Star Ferry is full, and there are many other places also disappears as a result of being dominated by capitalism culture. So here I will give some example of how these places that regard as fall behind, um, and then how these places against each other in the city and how they were replaced by the other. And in the fourth part, I titled it as The Guerrilla in Everyday Life, Foreign Domestic Helpers. In this part, I would like to elaborate in what way I think foreign domestic helpers are weak in this city, and in what way I think their occupation of um, status quo is very significant. And foreign domestic helpers are away from their home and become the weak side of the city because they're distant from dominant culture and value in Hong Kong. They live in a very limited space and in other people's home and are treated with cold look. However, when it comes to the carnival-like gatherings at Central District, another images is depicted. In this picture, in which they were a completely not in a completely passive position. Instead, they regain the initiate position. So in this way, I think they could be this case could be related to what Sertude think as the gorilla in everyday life. In the fifth part, strategy versus tactics, a space where the weak overcome the strong. Here I will discuss in what sense the foreign domestic helper overcomes the strong. To do so, I will refer to two concepts, place and space, as mentioned by Surtout, and to relate them with central and the foreign domestic helper group respectively. And then I will further introduce the concept of strategy and tactics, which are also defined in Surtout's book, and matches them with the policies in Central in an approach that foreign domestic helper adopts. And this also echoes to another concept and theory by Michel Foucault. He said that the authority and power do not only reside at one point, but are diffusive in space. Although authority may bring constraint, but it brings productivity as well. The foreign domestic helper's manipulation literally opposite to the original setting of Central. This is quite out of expect, and this phenomenon dominates the tactics, what Surtout called making do. They use tactics that making do to confront the environment. Even if Hong Kong Land tried to use policies to against the foreign domestic helpers' occupation of the district, but they failed because the helpers they united as a group and then defend themselves. In this paper, there are several theories that I'm going to use. So first, I've already mentioned frequently the practice of everyday life. I would use place, space, strategy, tactics, and making do throughout the whole essay and related to the case in Central. But I will also mention concept of place and non-place, and also the other space and heterotopia, as I think they are all relevant to this case. I'm not going to separate them in different paragraphs, but overall in um, the whole essay, I will mention them and then relate them to the case. For the conclusion, by the foreign domestic helpers' everyday practice, the status quo become a platform where turn invisible visible and enable them to enjoy what is not meant to be theirs by using tactics that making do. So finally, I will talk about my final project. So for my final project, I would like to explore and discuss the relations of weakness and strong in everyday space. And I will also discuss how the weak cope with the strong. But I think because if I only talk about this, it would be too abstract. So in order to give it a concrete idea, I think the case if the everyday practice of foreign domestic helper in such a school is very related to this concept, and it can serve as a concrete narrative and example that ties up my concept and abstraction. So, because at the end, I'm going to visualize the abstraction, the concept space, place, and the passive and active actions. And I think all of these could be traced back to the idea of how the foreign domestic group the practice to cope with the strong in the city, and thinking about their position in the space, in the place, will give me some sense of how to visualize this kind of concept. I think except the foreign domestic helpers, the horizontal and vertical landscape of Central will also help me to construct the experimental space that I would like to create. So in that space, I'm going to compare the small and large, weak and strong, and then each of them will compete with each other. I may use both visual and sound to represent the weak and strong. It is not necessarily to be very realistic the way it presents, but I think the real thing in life will make sense to my work and will help me develop the idea of this work. And so here comes to my bibliography. And thank you.